since we've been mostly talking about the first part of this path, awakening, I'll talk about the deeper stuff a little bit. And that's basically the last two levels there. This first awakening, it's interesting. It happens to some people rather quickly. Like the fastest I've seen was I talked to someone for 2 hours once, and she wasn't looking for it. She didn't know what it was. We just had this conversation, and it just went really, really, really deep. And she had an awakening that night. That was the fastest I've ever seen it, just from interacting with someone. But I've seen it in, a couple months. I've seen it in 6 months. I've seen it take a few years. But when someone's really sincere, and they're in the ways that we've been talking in this video, it's just a matter of time. It happens, So that's the initial awakening. And that really does, it just blows you open. I mean, it changes something fundamental about what you take yourself to be. It really does. So then, yeah, you go through this period of like, oh my God, life, it's just like, life is so beautiful. It's so incredibly, I can't even say what it is. It's so open. I don't even know what changed, but everything is different. It's very pristine in experience, and there's so much fluidity and spontaneity. That's the part that's really surprising. Like, I felt like I was always struggling and didn't even know it. I was carrying a weight I didn't know I was carrying. I was self-doubting. It's just like when that's just gone all of a sudden, oh my goodness, so beautiful, and so much flow and clarity. And then, yeah, the honeymoon period often kind of runs into this sort of experience of like, you start to feel the contraction again, the resistance patterns and repressed emotion. But the beauty here is you actually know what's happening. You're like, oh, I see how that was causing all my suffering before. And you also know intuitively, like, yeah, I have to go through this. It's like when you experience that degree of consciousness, this unbound consciousness, it's wonderful. And it allows you to bring things up into consciousness that were repressed before. And when it comes up into consciousness, you can kind of work through it and allow it to dissipate, and the resistance can dissipate. You can understand it better. You learn to come into contact with emotions in a much more holistic way. So all of that is great, but to the degree that you're kind of still struggling to manage that consciousness or something, it can be uncomfortable. And sometimes you do go, man, I feel so unenlightened now. And yet the insight hasn't gone anywhere. You know, the truth of that insight is still here. And you also know that this process has to play out the way it does. It propagates itself at some point. And then when things calm down, after that sort of shadow material, the sort of bulk of it has been worked through, you'll find periods of really deep peace. Like, it's pretty astounding. And like you said, it's kind of ordinary. There's nothing you can really say about it, but you darn well know it. It's, life is rather peaceful. Life is rather actually benevolent, even though all of the truths that we used to run from are still there. I mean, we still have a body that's going to age and so forth, but all of a sudden it's just not a problem. It feels so nice to just inhabit reality as the body that we take ourselves to be, also knowing we're not that body simultaneously without having to like wake up to that. It's just obvious. So there's this really nice sort of unity with the relative and absolute that comes into play as well. And then when I say these deep perceptual filters, there's these very fundamental filters that make reality seem a certain way, specifically dualistic, like there's a self and another. So we can wake up to the truth of unity within consciousness, and it feels wonderful, like what I've been describing as this first awakening. But when you actually start experiencing the physical world as non-dualistic, it's rather different. It's like intimacy beyond anything you had experienced even before. It's so hard to talk about this, but the perceptual filters are rather subtle. So you really do have to work through a lot of the reactivity and resistance and emotion, repressed emotion, through the shadow material to calm the body mind down enough to actually start to see precisely into your experience and become very curious about the nature of experience and presence itself. And now you have access to deep realization, which is really hard to talk about. It's very, very hard to talk about it. But more and more people are waking up, even to deep stages of realization, which is awesome. And then at some point there's what I would call liberation, which really is ultimately it's liberation from all of the fundamental illusions of separate self, of duality, separation, and even of form. So you literally wake up to the formless, radically intimate nature of presence that has no center, no edge, no beginning or end. It's not in time. It's not in space. And yet it's so obvious. It's rather full, has a rather full experiential nature to it. And suffering ultimately will come to an end.